Welcome back to Mindwaves, the official podcast of NYNO. At NYNO, we believe that understanding the brain is one of the most powerful ways to build empathy, reduce stigma, and improve lives. Every thought we have, every memory we form, every emotion we experience, and every challenge we face is connected in some way to the incredible organ that makes us who we are, the brain.
Through Mindwaves, we aim to bring neuroscience and mental health out of textbooks and research papers and into conversations that everyone can understand. By connecting students directly with researchers, clinicians, and advocates, we hope to make these fields more accessible and inspire the next generation of scientists and changemakers.
Today, we're excited to welcome Dr. Robert Froemke to the podcast.
Dr. Froemke is a professor of neuroscience whose research focuses on how the brain learns, adapts, and changes throughout life. His work explores neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable ability to reorganize itself through experience, as well as the neural circuits involved in learning, memory, sensory processing, and behavior.
Through both his research and mentorship, Dr. Froemke has helped us advance our understanding of how the brain develops and adapts, providing valuable insights into learning, communication, and neurological and mental health conditions. In today's conversation, we'll discuss the science of brain plasticity, how neuroscience research impacts our understanding of mental health, what students should know about careers in neuroscience, and some of the most exciting questions researchers are working on to answer today.
So, Dr. Froemke, thank you so much for joining us today. So, to start us off, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your current research and the work that you do?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been at NYU School of Medicine for about 16 years now. I started my lab in 2010. The focus of the laboratory is to understand the mechanisms and function of neuroplasticity, which is an amazing process by which brains grow and change. And it's a consequence of the experiences that we have. Brains change in this way or that way. And that allows us to learn and kind of do the amazing things that we and other animals do. Specifically, the focus of my lab is on communication. And that's really kind of in two main directions. Thinking about neural circuits that are important both for understanding baby cries and parent-child communication. And but kind of then kind of a larger level, understanding how sensory signals allow animals to communicate and coordinate for effective childcare and taking care of a family. And then the other branch of research in my laboratory is on cochlear implants, which are amazing devices, medical devices, that are electrodes that go into the ear and restore hearing to people who are deaf. These devices have been around for decades. They work pretty well in a lot of people, but basically in everybody, they could work a little bit better. So we're trying to understand the mechanisms by which these electrodes interface with the brain, provide a new sense of hearing, and are there ways we can leverage mechanisms of neuroplasticity to help these devices get better and help people hear again? That's basically the scope of the lab.
Thank you so much. So our first question is, what inspired you to pursue neuroscience, and was there like a particular experience or like a moment that sparked your interest in the brain?
Yeah, good question. So, and I'm pretty sure everybody you talk to on this is gonna have their own, super interesting, really weird kind of answer. Neuroscience, I think, attracts a lot of different people from kind of all walks of life. I'm sure even you both got interested in it for different reasons, and you're excited about different things. My background was in art school a long time ago. I'm sort of always interested in the similarities and differences in the internal models that we have in our brains of the external world and how we use those internal representations to think about other people, to make plans, and sort of operate in a complex, dynamic, changing, really busy, complicated world. I had no idea there was such a thing as neuroscience, like in high school and whatnot. I wasn't actually that interested in science. I had some background in computer programming, and so I went to art school really trying to build computer graphics tools to give people the ability to make their own art, Photoshop. But I actually wasn't that good of a programmer, and I didn't really know how to do art. didn't know how to draw and everything. So actually I spent about a year and a half in art school, just really fully committing to the techniques of studio art. And it was an amazing experience. I still value those art school days, even though I haven't made art since I was 19. I think that the practice of being a lab scientist is a whole lot like being in an art studio in terms of thinking about what's kind of going on in the world, thinking about, our own perspectives and talking to people about their perspectives, playing around with different media and kind of experimenting, kind of what you do with it. Your parents don't really get what you do, but they kind of like that you're sort of, on the leading edge of culture, that kind of thing. Um, so about after a year and a half of being in art school, I essentially dropped out and went into a computer science program at Tufts University. There was an amazing guy there, Jim Schmolze, who was really interested in robotics and artificial intelligence. And this is in the mid 90s when AI was basically dead. I mean, it's totally wild to me that we can pull out our smartphones and do instant face recognition, and AI is sort of taken over the world in, some ways good, in some ways maybe, less than good. But in those days, it was basically, it was an intellectual or academic endeavor, but it wasn't really that functional or useful. But from being in an AI program, I was interested kind of in computation. Then I got interested in biological computation because of the power of artificial neural networks. I took a neuroscience class. It blew my mind. And then I saw a poster, a flyer in the halls of the computer science department offering a PhD program at the NYU Center for Neuroscience. And I had no idea that you could do a PhD in something other than you did your bachelor's degree in. I thought that, if you go into computer science, that kind of tracks you into being a computer scientist or a programmer. Whereas neuroscience draws from many walks of life: biology, chemistry, physics, computer science. So I applied here to NYU to the neuro program, and I was rejected, but it kind of got like neuro and PhD programs in New York City in my head. And so I moved to New York and started working in a lab, and basically in that way got into graduate school and started really training professionally to become a scientist.
Thank you. For students who may be new to the idea of neuroscience, how would you describe what neuroscience is, and why do you think it's such an important field today?
Oh boy. So um, I think that there are different perspectives on what neuroscience is. Neuroscience is a very interesting, broad field. And I mean, from one perspective, the brain is a biological piece of tissue, like a plant leaf, like a kidney. And there's a lot of interesting biology that neurons and neural circuits happen to have. And so I think there are some people who are drawn into neuroscience because it offers them particular challenges or interesting things in terms of gene expression and post-mitotic neurons, cells that don't divide anymore and that are alive for decades, cells with very large processes, and how do you traffic proteins here and there. And I think there are people who are sort of interested in other people or interested in philosophy or cognition. Maybe, what is consciousness? Is it even a thing? Who are other people and how do they feel? And how do I know how they feel? Or how do I even perceive the world? How do I interpret, photons hitting my retina and turn it into a beautiful visual scene? It's amazing. And so I think both the kind of the mystery and kind of the majesty of the brain get a lot of people excited about neuroscience. And I think there are people who are really interested in the natural world. They're interested in frogs hopping in a pond, or how a fish might be able to pick up a tool with its mouth and try to break open a clamshell, or do great apes have some kind of tool making ability, or how do birds fly? And so they're interested primarily in behavior. And the controllers of behavior are neural circuits and brains. And so they're interested basically in specific, aspects of the amazing physical world. and kind of get into neuroscience and trying to understand how it is that animals make decisions to go do this or that. And you don't have to pick and choose. I mean, the amazing thing is you can be excited about all of these things in different ways and at different times. And neuroscience has a lot to offer. Neuroscience is a very, very young field compared to like physics and chemistry. We don't have a unified model of how the brain works. It's not even clear how much of current neuroscience is still sort of cobbling together anecdotes and hypotheses and is kind of more or less mythology along the road to a proper, robust hard science. It's not even clear if it's even possible to solve the brain. Can you come up with a series of equations that are fully predictive over what someone does given some state or some input? I'm not even sure that's possible. I mean, frankly, I don't even think I want to believe that that's possible. So I kind of like the fact that we're all so, there's some element of chance and strangeness about all of us that would make the brain kind of forever some unreachable kind of goal to try to understand. I think it's an amazing thing for humans to try to work on.
Okay, so I know earlier you mentioned neuroplasticity, and a major focus of your work is neuroplasticity. So can you explain, like, how you would describe neuroplasticity and why it's so important for understanding how the brain learns and how the brain adapts?
Oh, yeah, totally. So, and this is really why I got interested in neuroscience, because I think the fact that the brain is this piece of tissue, this organ, these neural circuits that learn and change and adapt. It's one of the most amazing things about in the physical universe. The fact that living creatures are biological replicators that's also really amazing. That's kind of a separate issue. So most brains aren't fixed. They're not static. We're not just kind of responding to different stimuli with these very predictable responses. And if we did that, I think we'd pretty quickly go extinct. The world is changing. I mean, the world's changing on a short time scale. It's changing on a fast time scale. And ecological niches come and then they go. Even culturally, there are things that get people really excited, and then things disappear. But even quite practically, right? Like a tree might have a bunch of fruit, and then it doesn't. A water hole might be really plentiful, and then it might dry up. Or a lion might move there, and then you've got to deal with this lion that happens to be around. So there's sort of this, biological arms race or strategizing that has to happen for all animals to have to survive. We have to take care of each other, and many animals cooperate in a lot of interesting and complicated ways we're still trying to understand. One of the amazing things that humans do is we do cooperation on like a massive scale. We can have collections of people, we can have nations, we can have political bodies. It's really, really amazing. You can have communication all over the planet. But the magic is that the brain can change, that it can learn from these experiences, that ultimately any kind of experience that we have is translated into electrochemical activity in our brains through the amazing physiology of our eyes, of our ears, our sense of touch and smell. And we're sort of kind of always learning sort of as we live our lives. We're very sensitive to contingencies. This happened, and so that happened, right? Cause and effect is sort of the basis for a lot of learning. And so a long time ago in evolution, adaptable systems sort of emerged, and they've only kind of become more adaptable and more flexible. So neuroplasticity is basically that at kind of a low level, that if you use the synapse a lot, it changes in a way to make it easier to use. It's a lot like exercise, right? If you want to get strong, you got to work out a muscle. And that might be hard work. It might be painful. There might be some fatigue right afterwards. But the next day, you'll be stronger. And so it's not even an analogy. Actually, a lot of the mechanisms of neuroplasticity were kind of first worked out at the neuromuscular junction decades ago. And then muscles and nerves are a little bit different. But there are some biological principles that also apply in the brain too. The brain's not a muscle. But if you want to learn French, you got to sit down and do the hard work of trying to learn French. You can't just sort of look at the pages in the book and sort of hope you get it all. The way you pass your math test is not by just flipping through your math book and hoping you kind of absorb it all by osmosis. You've got to do the hard work of doing exercises and struggling through it. And that can be very frustrating, but that frustration, when you break through it, that's when learning really happens.
Thank you so much. How does neuroscience research help us better understand mental health conditions and neurological disorders like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's?
Yeah, for sure. Well, so as I mentioned, neuroscience is a very early field, and we still have a lot of things to do in terms of helping the human condition. 50 years ago, it was it'd be astounding to make a claim like, I want to go to graduate school or medical school and try to cure cancer. And yet in 2026, there are a whole bunch of cancers that we actually understand at a pretty deep level and can effectively treat and even cure. But mental disorders are even more challenging. We only have the barest understanding of a lot of these things. This device I mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, the cochlear implant, deafness is one of the few conditions that we can treat from studies in neuroscience. And I should be clear, not everyone who is hard of hearing or deaf is disabled and wants a cochlear implant. Being deaf is just a different kind of way to experience the world in a lot of ways. On the other hand, there are some people who are deaf who want their hearing back, and so a cochlear implant can restore that. There are other devices, and they're definitely like medical treatments, SSRIs, drugs of different kinds. There are epilepsy medicines that can help mitigate, control, even prevent people's epilepsy, which is amazing. Things like Alzheimer's, disorders, schizophrenia, post and peripartum conditions of various kinds, we're still only really understanding kind of what the manifestation of these conditions happens to be. Even the word schizophrenia is just a word we've come up with to try to explain a few different sets of symptoms that have a statistical manifestation, both positive and negative, in a variety of patients, right? There doesn't necessarily have to be even like an objective reality of a thing like schizophrenia. Just like, there's no such thing as France. That's just a human cultural conceit. And before there were humans, there was no France. And after humans, there'll be no France. It's just a term we use for cultural convenience. All due respect to France. But these problems are really hard. One thing that neuroscience, I think, has done, which I think is really important, is it sort of helped normalize and humanize the vagaries of the human condition, the full sets of experiences that we all have. Progressively, as we study the brain, we're kind of understanding ourselves not just individually, but kind of as a species and the things we experience. And the hope is through the study of neuroscience in particular, right, we understand that people with Tourette's or epilepsy or have hallucinations or have extreme urges to do sometimes terrible things. These aren't people who are possessed by spirits. This isn't magic. This isn't mysticism. Most parts of the world, people aren't being burned for witchcraft anymore. Then there was a period of time where people were lobotomized or chemically lobotomized. Basically, mental health issues were a public health condition. People who were crazy were threats to the status quo and were institutionalized or lobotomized. They wouldn't be such a problem anymore. Now we can think of mental health issues as private personal health issues and understand that people who might be severely autistic, that they can be very high cognitive functioning. They can have rich internal worlds, be amazing communicators if they're communicated with in the right way. You can go on YouTube and see movies of people's personal experiences, people who seem very dysfunctional if you were to sit them down like this, because for a lot of people, face-to-face interaction is extremely overstimulating and people shut down. But if you let people kind of relax and examine them or ask them to kind of report their own experience in different ways, you can get beautiful descriptions of how it is to experience the world. And so neuroscience has definitely, I think, begun to make it clear that just because someone seems like they're different than us, that doesn't mean they have a disorder, they're bad, or they need to be sequestered in some way, right, or imprisoned, right? The world is, and humanity can manifest in all kinds of different and wonderful ways. That's valuable. That's super valuable. But that's a beginning. And the hard work of like trying to understand and treat things like Alzheimer's and schizophrenia is progressing. It's slow work. And it's pretty amazing to think that like after a few decades, we were able to like work real hard and build airplanes and then build rocket ships and put people on the moon, and now the sky's full of satellites and stuff. Whereas like after a few decades, we're still kind of making the slow slog towards understanding mental disorders. Just because it was easy to put a ship on the moon doesn't mean it's going to be easy to cure Alzheimer's.
What are some common misconceptions that people have about the
Common misconceptions about the brain. Well, I mean, from one perspective, I think like all of us neuroscientists hopefully have a little bit of a sense of humor about what it is we're working on. Because if we had great hypotheses about how the brain works, we would know how the brain works. We just don't know how the brain works. So actually there are action potentials. There is neuroplasticity, there is visual cortex and stuff. But, you know, as we kind of refine those hypotheses and get into newer data and kind of newer modes of thinking about neural circuits, there are liable to be misconceptions. The scientific method, like you learn about in school, pick a hypothesis, design an experiment, figure out what you did wrong, iterate. That's all about, refining and changing our misconceptions to hopefully things that are kind of more, you know, uh, adequate and appropriate. In my own kind of science, I work a lot on this hormone oxytocin, which is this neuropeptide. It's important for all kinds of things in the brain and the body. It's absolutely essential for the milk ejection reflex during nursing. It's absolutely essential for uterine contractions during childbirth. But oxytocin is not a love drug. Just because you inhale oxytocin or something doesn't mean you're gonna, like everybody around you. That's not how neurochemicals work. That's not how brains work. And I'm not sure anyone actually believes that. At the same time, like I have talked to a number of journalists, it seems to be a question that kind of keeps on coming up. So there's that. One thing I like about the field of neuroscience that I feel like it is a science of study of ourselves. And so I think the scientific mindset is very healthy in terms of thinking about the biases we have. Even things like sex differences. Men are like this, women are like that. Or other things that aren't so data-driven, but are just like either hopes or biases or things that we might have heard about or read about. It's good to be skeptical and also to be interested in what the actual data are, as opposed to just thinking we know about how the world works and how people are. I think it's very healthy.
Unfortunately, this is where we were interrupted. The question asked was, if our listeners take away one message from today's conversation, what would he want it to be? This is how he answered.
Neuroscience is how accessible it really is. I've got, high school students and undergrads who work in my lab and have made major discoveries. There's still kind of a primacy on looking and watching, and that's something a lot of people can do. And what I like about kind of today's scientific world is that it seems like there's more of an open door with people who are kind of just watching the interesting things butterflies are doing, or their pet mouse or their pet dog is doing, and wanting to learn more about it and getting into a dialogue with people who are kind of in research labs. And I think, I would hope too that your listeners will appreciate that, science is sort of about trying to make the world a better place for everyone. And by understanding ourselves individually and collectively, and that's hard, that's slow, that's costly. It's a thing that states, local governments, national governments, global organizations work to fund, or not. It's a choice we make. Do we want to have science as an orientation to life, which is simply, we can understand the world, and we can make measurements and question our own assumptions. And in that way, we can learn things and grow and change, even if that learning process, or especially if it kind of aches a little bit in the moment. It's better to learn and know the truth.
So, Dr. Froemke, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights and experiences with us and our listeners. We truly appreciate your time and your commitment to advancing our understanding of the brain, and we're so sorry for all the disturbances that we had today. We're so sorry that on our behalf that was much for joining us.
Talking to you. Bye-bye.
As we wrap up today's episode, we'd like to thank Dr. Robert Froemke once again for joining us on Mindwaves.
One theme that appeared throughout today's conversation is that the brain is constantly changing, adapting, and learning. From forming memories to developing new skills, our experiences shape us in the ways that neuroscience is only beginning to fully understand.
Conversations like this remind us why neuroscience matters, not only because it helps us answer scientific questions, but because it helps us better understand ourselves and the people around us.
At NYNO, our mission is to make neuroscience and mental health education more accessible while fostering empathy, curiosity, and awareness for our community. So be sure to follow Mindwaves and stay tuned for future conversations with researchers, clinicians, advocates, and leaders who are helping expand our understanding of the brain and mental health.
Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep exploring.
This is Mindwaves, a podcast by NYNO. Thank you.